Hi,
Okay.
guys, and welcome back to the Female Fitness Podcast. So, I'm your host, Danny, and today I have the pleasure of being joined by Petrina, who I've come across through social media. We've been following each other for a while now. We have very similar sort of morals and values, and she is just an incredibly inspiring human being who I'm sure many of you will have the same thoughts of, and I feel like her message is one that you guys need to hear. So, Petrina, could you give us a bit of sort of background on your journey through life and fitness so far?
Yeah. I mean, well, thank you for that introduction because that means a lot coming from you because I really respect you and the message that you're putting out and really why I wanted to talk to you and kind of share the story with you because I feel like you'll represent it and value it in the same way that I do. But to give a bit of background for people that don't know me, I was diagnosed with cancer in 2014. So that was when my original cancer diagnosis was, I was actually pregnant, and they found it while I was pregnant, and I was living in New York, and I was 31 years old, and I had this like huge career. I was working for this asset management firm, and I'm very ambitious, and was with my husband, and like flying high in life. And I had a pregnancy routine checkups, and one of my smears came back abnormal. They sent me to the oncologist, and the oncologist said to me, don't worry about it, just come back after you've had the baby. So I was 31 and living this amazing life, and who has cancer at 31? And so off I went, and I had the baby, and he was 5 months old when they found the tumor. So the tumor and the cancer had been spreading and growing while I was pregnant, and they had kept missing it. So by the time they found the cancer, I had a 16 centimeter tumor in me, which was inoperable, and meant that I had to go into a process of quite intensive, like chemo radiation. So I had radiation every single day and chemo concurrently once a week on top of it. And then I had something called brachytherapy, which is internal radiation. So it was a very traumatic, grueling time, and it was quite shocking. And I was like, who has cancer? Got a 5-month-old baby. To be honest, like that in itself was very traumatic and grueling. And we got through it, and thought after I was given the all clear, which was around kind of the treatment itself lasted about 3 months, 3-4 months, and then they wait 3 more months to give you the all clear, and then I had no evidence of disease. And so I was like, okay, great. Like, I'm going to go back to normal and go back to my job. And didn't really know what life had in store for me. And essentially what subsequently happened was I had developed something called pelvic radiation disease. And it's quite a common side effect for the type of treatment that I've had in women and men too, when you have radiation to the pelvis. But people develop it at different times, and it can often go away. And sadly, I'm probably in the kind of top 1% in terms of severity of the disease. And the disease is lifelong and it's chronic. And essentially what it means is that it's shutting down all of the organs that I have internally in my pelvis. And as it continues and progresses, it creates scar tissue. So I've had all sorts of health issues relating to that. So in 2018, I was very, very ill. I developed another tumor in my bladder, and I was losing a lot of blood. I had a lot of blood transfusions and was hemorrhaging, and I had emergency surgery. I nearly lost my whole bladder, which would have meant I would have had an orostomy bag, which kind of sits on your stomach. But they saved half of my bladder. So again, I thought like, okay, well, that was a crisis, but got through that. And then I stopped being able to eat or drink. And I didn't really know or understand what was going on. And it turned out that the disease had spread and formed scar tissue in the bowel. So I had a bowel obstruction, and I was very, very ill for a long time. And I actually ended up being in hospital for probably about 4-5 months because I was too sick for surgery, because I wouldn't have survived it. So they kept me in hospital, and they fed me intravenously through something called TPN. And basically you don't eat or drink, and they feed you, and they essentially are keeping you alive. So they kept me alive for the surgery, and I went in for the surgery, and I was going to have a colostomy bag, but they gave me a bowel resection. So I lost half of my small intestines and half of my colon, and then came out of that. And that was very challenging because, you know, not just from the abdominal recovery, but from also a process of which is probably incomprehensible to people, but you have to learn to eat again, because I hadn't eaten or drunk a single thing in nearly 5-6 months. And so your body stops producing any ability or capability of actually being able to like absorb, break down, or digest food. So that in itself was very difficult. The disease sadly has continued to spread, and now the rest and the remaining part of my bowel is diseased. So I'll be having a stoma surgery. And because of the pressure that it's put on my organs, I also had sepsis and an ovarian cyst. So my kidneys are now failing, and I'm waiting for the stoma surgery, and they're going to also take out my ovaries now. And the prognosis of the disease is that I'll probably end up having a total pelvic, and I always pronounce this incorrectly, exoneration. And what that means is that you lose all of the organs in your pelvis, and you end up with 2 bags, one like a colostomy and a urostomy. And so the irony is the treatment that was meant to save me, which did save me from the cancer originally, is actually the thing that's killing you slowly. So I've been sick since 2014, and you know, I've got a long road ahead of me next year for 2023, and it's not a cure. It's just this is the next kind of step in the process. And so I think kind of coming to terms with the fact that you're never going to get better, and this thing is going to take more and more, has been like such a journey. So that's kind of where we're at the moment.
If you had known what it would lead to, would you go back and still have the treatment that you had?
So when they told us about the treatment, it's quite strange that you asked that, because my initial reaction to it was, okay, what are the alternatives? Can I have some time to think about this? Because I was young and naive, but just intuitively I really felt that, well, you know, this is huge. Like, chemo's poison, basically, and radiation's burning you. It just kind of intuitively didn't feel right without asking, and I'm quite a logical person, and I really didn't want to do it, but they said, they were very, very crystal clear that without it I was going to die, and I needed to start soon. And I had a 5-month-old baby, and you know, that's just kind of what I did. I was quite naive, but it's an interesting question, because I think you know, the older my son's gotten, it's different now, because you know, he understands more, he's more of a person. But would I have made that trade back then? I if I hadn't have had a baby, it's a really tough question to ask. I think, you know, having children, you know, kind of changes that perspective. But you know, it's pretty unbelievable kind of what's happened in the last 8 years, and there's a lot of suffering.
Yeah, it's a hard one, isn't it? Because obviously it was pretty much like your only option at the time, but it's led to so many life challenges for you. So it's such a difficult one to even comprehend.
Yeah. And I think from the doctor's point of view as well, is they don't even know, because not everyone ends up like me. So I have amazing cancer care and such great treatment. And some of the surgeons that look after me, who are specialists, have said they probably meet one person globally a year who has the extent of the disease that I do. So there's lots of us who have the disease, but it doesn't always present in the same way, or it does and then it stops. But there's just no. So at the time, the doctors will always tell you, you do the treatment because the odds are that you'll come out of it okay.
Yeah.
I was just that unlucky 1%. Like, you never could have called it.
Yeah. And it would be very easy, like in your situation, to kind of resent the people that sort of recommended that treatment to you. But it sounds like you have a really sort of like mature perspective on that.
Yeah. I mean, I don't resent the treatment, because I think it's saved my life, and so I'm here because of it. I wish that I think the lesson that I've learned and taken away from it all is, I really, really feel like we don't advocate enough for ourselves in terms of our health. And back then I was 31, 32, and people are telling you cancer and you have a baby and it's very scary. And we just kind of went along and did what people suggested that we do. And I see this because things are different now with me. But, you ask most people, well, what's your blood type? And people won't know. What happened to you this year? Like, what have you broken? What illnesses have you had? People don't understand their medical histories, or that, and you need to know yourself to advocate for yourself. And that's really kind of the biggest lesson, and what I would say to people as well, because don't wait for a health crisis to put yourself in the hands of someone. People can help you to a certain extent, but the more information you have on yourself, and the more that you know and you understand yourself and your body, the more you'll be able to advocate for yourself. And I think that that's really, really important.
Yeah, definitely. And so with everything that you've been through, I know that you still train. I think it would be very easy for a lot of people in your circumstance to be like, training is the last thing on my mind. But what purpose does training serve for you personally now? And what does your training look like?
For me, training is my highest form of self-care. Like, when you talk about self-care in 2022, and everyone's different, but for me, it is the biggest form of self-care and self-respect that I have for myself. And it is about the appreciation and gratitude that I have, that I'm still here and I'm still capable. And I have a phrase which I always say, which is potential and possibility. And I use this because I feel like there's a lot of people that move through life and use comparison in a really kind of negative type way, where instead of actually thinking about, well, what's the possibility? Like, life circumstances are always going to shift. Like, you get older, you get married, you change jobs, you change geography, your environment is different. Maybe you're more stressed at work, you might have a baby. So your environment and situation will always shift, but you'll always have potential, and there'll always be possibility. It's just what you want to look for in it. So has my training shifted and aligned dependent on what my health situation is? Of course, absolutely 100%. But it still doesn't occur to me that I can't go train, because for me, that is the expression of kind of my self-care to myself. But I don't I also think people really overcomplicate training and health. And especially kind of, as you and I know, I've done a lot of photos with Jodie this year, and my training is not complicated. I train 3 times a week for an hour, and that's it, literally it. And then when you'll do photos, and kind of with social media, and everyone's got an opinion, but people think that it's this like incredibly complex, extreme process. And it's really not. It's just actually about being very smart, and having the right people around you who are smart and who can guide you. So You know, for me, training is three times a week for 1 hour strength training, and that will adapt depending on what's going on. So you know, for example, at the moment my balance is quite off, so like we're really kind of much more like focused on like how we can like modify certain exercises, so like I can actually do kind of unilateral things like with support or balance, and then obviously I have abdominal issues and pain, so we avoid things like hip thrusts, and so working around that. But it's you know it's actually not as like, my situation is complex, but training overall for the average person doesn't have to, you don't have to be in the gym for hours on end to, you know, have certain goals.
Yeah. And even if you didn't do things like photo shoots with Jodie, for example,
Yeah.
would you still train?
The photos are absolutely, the objective was never photos, ever. The photos for me were just a way in which to capture the expression of the training and how much I love the training. It's nothing to do with the photos. Like, I've never been like, let's start training, let's prep, let's do this for the photos. It's always just been this absolute joy of training and what my body, like my body continues to keep me alive, and I feel the resilience given the circumstances that it's under, the joy that I found in training, and the appreciation of actually being able to use my body, and what a gift it is to be able to go and do these things in life. Like, that's what the photos are. That's the expression of them. It has nothing to do with has nothing to do with the aesthetics or the photos or social media. I couldn't, and that's why I love Jodie, because like he knows that, like I couldn't care less. Like, it's just literally about the fact that I think it is incredible that I am still alive and still here and still able to do these things amongst all of these circumstances. And so if I get a shot, if I get an opportunity, I'm going to take it. And that's just kind of who I am.
Yeah, I love that. And I loved how you spoke about as well, the fact that you don't have to overcomplicate the run up to a photo shoot, and you can just show up as yourself and express yourself, because that's what I know you spoke about, sort of how before we started recording this, how you sort of started following me after our shoot with Jodie, and that was very much about, I said to my clients, look, you know, this is not about extreme fat loss. It's not about getting as shredded as possible. It's about celebrating yourself and the phase that you're in your journey. And it's giving you something to be proud of, to look back on, to push yourself out of your comfort zone. And like, for example, I didn't manipulate anything. I literally just showed up as I was on the day. And like, I think that actually is a very liberating thing to do, because it shows you that you don't have to manipulate your external appearance to do that kind of thing.
I agree. And I also think that, I actually think you've hit on something really important, because I actually think counter to the photos is that it can become quite toxic for some girls. And I know a lot of people who will do photo shoots and go through that process to look that way. And then you get stuck into this cycle of where you suddenly don't like yourself normal because you looked so different in these photos, and that's how you want to look all of the time. And I think the goal in life is really to just understand like that, how you show up and your character and the things that you can be proud of in terms of your self-esteem and your self-worth, and it's not derived from your kind of physical being. You can still do these things. Like, you're worth celebrating. It's not what you look like, it's the actions that you've taken to get yourself to that point. And the photo is just a capturing of that process. And so, you know, I think the fact that you went and you showed up, I think that's so key, because I think it's heartbreaking seeing so many people go through this process where they are so genuinely upset, either restricting, rebounding, and then feeling guilty and all of these emotions. And I think it's a real issue, and it really upsets me with women.
Yeah, I agree. It's really, I think it's exacerbated by things like bodybuilding, unfortunately. It's not that bodybuilding is bad, but it's that people see this process that they go through in terms
Mm.
of the improvement season where they're trying to build muscle tissue, followed by the extreme prep. And then they
Yeah.
then replicate that when they don't have a need to do that because
Yeah.
they don't step on stage, but they replicate that process
Yeah.
for things like photo shoots when actually it's not necessary.
Yeah, I agree. I think the problem is with training is like if we look at life just overall, just in terms of like society and validating us, I think the problem is with training is in a lot of other aspects. Like we're looking for social validation, and you can be accredited through university degrees, how accomplished you are at work, like your job, like money. And I think the issue is with training is that people are training and they're trying to, and they like it and they enjoy it. And they're feeling like, well, how do I validate this? And there's kind of only two ways to get the social validation, which is either you do the photos or you go into bikini prep. And I think that this is where a lot of people, and I talked to some of my friends who have done photos and about this, and even recently a friend of mine was saying, you know, I think maybe I'll do a competition. And I was like, but why? Because actually, like, it's distinctly different between like what you want from your life versus like what you're going to get. But
Yeah.
it's because, you know, there's not many ways in which to kind of, unless you're self-validated, like, and I think that that's why people look to do photos or bikini competitions, because there's some kind of form of validation. And I think it's a real problem, because I think you lose the joy, and the joy is in the training. I tell you, the joy is in the physical showing up, the self-respect, the discipline, the appreciation of having a body that moves and works for you. That's where the joy is, and that's what you have to validate for yourself. Like the photos are not important. And if you want to prep and do bikini competitions, go for it. But I just always say to people, like, you just have to understand why you're doing something and making sure it's for the right reasons, and not because you're lacking something in yourself that needs to be validated.
100%. Like, I think that's such an important point. And did you, before you went through all of the life challenges that you've been through,
Yeah.
was your focus for training more external appearance based, or have you always had the mindset of like training is about how I feel and supporting my health and celebrating my body?
Yeah, so I think before all of this happened, because so I was living in New York and I had my career, my training was just very like, it was very haphazard, like probably a lot of like running. It was just more like heart health and just making sure I was okay, because to be perfectly frank, I didn't really have the time to delve kind of deeper into fitness outside of like just going and just making sure that my heart was okay. And then I was just like work. And then with my health issues, what became quite apparent is there's, because of the complexity of my situation, there's actually not a lot of people that really understand and can really train me safely. So I'm quite unique in that sense. But it's never ever been about aesthetics, ever. And you know, look, I'll hold my hands up and say, like, of course, like I've been aesthetic focused, like in other aspects. You know, I think that like I grew up in an era where Kate Moss did her heroin chic model post, and that was the look. It was like, be so skinny, you look like you're about to die, and that was the look. So of course, like we're all bombarded all of the time about aesthetics, and I think, you know, it is something very difficult. And you know, when I was told I was obviously having a stoma bag or a urostomy bag, is it every girl's dream? You know, no, of course not. Like, I'm going to be brutally honest. I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, I can't wait for next year and get a stoma bag. But, you know, is it necessary? Is it required? 100%. Is it going to change my character and who I am? No. And it's sad. It's upsetting. But I think that, you know, life complicated emotions can coexist, like gratitude and positivity, as well as, you know, feelings of loss and grief, and wanting more from your life can coexist. You just have to be very self-aware. So, you know, I'm not immune to the understanding of aesthetics, because, as I said, it's very real. You know, the urostomy and stoma bag being a very good example. You know, that is physically going to change me, and it's not something that everyone sees every day. So, you know, like people look at people will look like, if you're on the beach, if you're in a bikini, like, it's going to happen. But again, this goes back to like what's your validation, like where are you getting your validation from? And like for me, like I self-validate, and so I know that I will be able to handle it when the time comes, because it's not about aesthetics, because it's not going to change my character. I'm still going to be Petrina, I'm still going to be this person. I'm just, you know, like going to have a bag. Am I going to love it? No, like I'm not. And there's a lot of people who are really cool with it, and I have a lot of friends who are also cool with it because it saved their lives, but are also very realistic and like, yeah, of course. Like, I look down and like, I don't want it. I don't want it. I'm very honest. Like, I don't want it. I'm gonna have it. And but again, it goes back to this validation and where we're deriving that from, and just the understanding that, you know, we are influenced by aesthetics, but you got to try and figure out and rise above it and understand your own values and who you are as a character and a person.
Yeah. And it's like there's sort of a bit of a line, and like you can care about aesthetics, you can care about your external appearance, but it's important not to let it become your identity and what defines you, and to know that like you are so much more than that, like you've said.
Yeah, I also would say, and I add to this on the flip side as well, for a very long time, I felt very, very guilty that I did somewhat care about aesthetics, because I had survived so much and I wanted more from my life. And I felt guilty and I hid it, because at the back of my mind, and the narrative that's out there is, well, just be happy, you're alive. Everyone, like, lots of people die, and I've had lots of friends who have died. And so you kind of hold yourself back because you feel like you're being greedy and you feel like it's vain. But this is what I'm saying about the complexity. If you have the right person, and, you know, again, like why I resonate with the things that you say so much, and you said something, you know, about that really hit with me, which I believe in, which is like progressing towards your goals regardless of your circumstances and not waiting for perfection. And I think that as long you can have aesthetic goals and you don't have to feel guilty about it, but just as long as they're for the right reasons, and that's the work that you have to do. And so I also don't think that we should cancel people who have aesthetic goals, but because I think that both ends of the spectrum are dangerous.
Yeah,
if that makes sense.
exactly. It's about finding that middle ground and just making sure that it doesn't become your identity, because when it does, that's when you're at risk of really struggling. If, for example, something happens and you can't train for whatever reason, and therefore your external appearance changes, you're gonna feel like you're like yourself. You're going to feel like horrendous, like your world is coming crashing down if you've tied your identity to your external appearance. Whereas if you recognize, like yourself, that actually there's so many more important things about you, and yes, you care about your external appearance, but it isn't why you're valued, and it isn't why you're important for the people around you. And so it's okay if your external appearance fluctuates, and it's okay if it changes.
100%. And also it's about, you know, there are some things that you just can't control in life, and you have to get a handle on that. So, you know, for me, I've been all ends of the spectrum. Like, I can train and eat, but my body is going to do what it wants to do. And when I've been really sick, I was 41 kg and looked like I was going to snap in half. The other week I was in hospital, I put on 8 kg in 6 days. I like blew up. And you have to be okay with yourself. Like, I can do photos, but there'll be times where I have no muscle mass and I'm wasted, and there'll be times where I'm huge because I'm on steroids and I'm sick or I've got fluid. If I if I tied my whole value to what I look like, I would be in wild trouble because it oscillates frequently. So you have to understand that, because if you only like yourself a certain way, like, you're just going to struggle. You're just wasting your life, and you're missing out on like all of the happy, joyous moments that you could be having, because there's so much more to life than just what you look like.
Yeah. And do you think the way that you view training as something that is so much more than just a means to manipulate your external appearance, do you think because of that, it has an impact on your relationship with training and your relationship with fitness?
So I think I think that it's actually much more about perspective. It's not really, you don't have to have had, and I think this is where people get confused, like sometimes with my situation, like you don't have to have had like some kind of horrendous trauma or life event to just, you know, have this perspective on training, because training is so amazing for pretty much everyone. Like the ability to move in a way in which you can move, that's safe for you, that's enjoyable, how it builds your self-esteem, your self-confidence, your self-worth. It teaches you things about yourself in terms of understanding that you can do hard things, because training is hard. Like, it is hard. And like, it's also a lot of fun, but it's hard because it's meant to be. And teaching yourself that you can rely on yourself and you can trust yourself to get through those situations, well, then it becomes broadly applicable to your life. And then once you start realizing, like, I can do that one hard thing, so now this other hard things come along, I can do that too. So I think it's just valuable for everyone.
I love that. I really do. And I think that more people should think about that. And it also, I think, is important to, like, everyone tries to make their training like fit in a box and tries to do what's optimal, for example. But actually, I think that not enough people put enough emphasis on moving their body in a way that they enjoy moving their body, because actually that's what's going to really add to their life and make them happier on a daily basis, and mean that they're able to actually stay healthier, because if they enjoy their training, they're going to stay more consistent with it as well.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's like the you know, training is the same as like many other things in life, like art, movies that we watch, things that we enjoy. There's not a one size fits all. Like, we're all unique and different, and you need to find that particular fit. I think the issue is with training, and I don't know if you've experienced this with clients, is that it's hard, right? So basically, once you start something and it's hard, instinctively you're like, oh no, I don't like it. And so you give up. And I use this analogy because I have an 8-year-old, and I think that if people push through, like, you've got to push through the hard to understand if you enjoy it, because it's just going to be hard and it's just going to suck. Like, I tell you, like, every time I get out of hospital and I'm like, here we are, like Tetris, like level 1 again, and I go back in and it sucks. Like, it really sucks. It's hard, but I keep going. And I use this analogy because my son is 8. And so he's obviously gotten into kind of different sports and things that we've put him into. And he, at the beginning, he moaned nonstop. I don't like swimming. I don't like this. I don't like that. So I cut him a deal. And I said to him, this is the deal. I was like, when you get good at, say, swimming, I was like, once you learn how to swim, and you can swim and you can do all of this, then you get the option to turn around to me and say you don't want to do it. And if you don't want to do it anymore, I'll pull you out and you won't have to do it. And has he gotten good at anything and asked me to pull him out? No. Yeah. And it's the same as training. It's going to suck. It's going to be hard. You got to push through, because you're going to think instinctively you don't enjoy it. But you've got to figure out and push through that hard, because once you find that thing that you enjoy, even when it's hard, you're not going to stop.
Yeah, I love that. And I think it's always the first step that's the hardest as well. And then, like you said, once you start to actually reap the benefits of it and see yourself progressing, that's when you're
Exactly.
like, oh shit, like this is so
Yeah.
good. And I'm actually learning so much from this that I can apply to the rest of my life. And I feel
Yeah.
amazing. So yeah, I love that so
Yeah.
much.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and something else I wanted to talk about, which you mentioned briefly earlier, how sometimes negative comparison can be quite problematic. Have you ever struggled with falling into the trap of comparing yourself to others in a negative way?
Yeah. So I am really passionate about comparison because I think it is probably one of the biggest toxic traits that we have, and I think one of the biggest societal problems that we actually face. And I think I've 100% been there, and especially on this journey that I've been on, because the way in which I dealt with a lot of things in the early days was when I was first diagnosed in 2014, I think Instagram had just started. And so like the connectivity and the ability to actually like find other people was very limited. And then as my health deteriorated and I had different surgeries, I became, especially especially with the bowel situation and being in a hospital and not eating, I became quite I would say I went into a bit of a dark hole on comparison, because it was really hard for me to not, first of all, compare myself. I'd be like looking for people who'd had bowel surgeries, and I'd be like, well, they're doing this, they're doing that, they're doing this. Where am I doing this? And then I'd start comparing myself to healthy people who hadn't had bowel surgeries. And so suddenly you're caught up in this like really vicious cycle of just a complete lack of self-worth and self-respect. And the problem is with comparison is when you're comparing yourself, you're not actually assessing yourself against equal measures. Like life is unequal and there's inequity, and we're not all on the same starting blocks. It's like, looking at how they start races, like running races, we're all like staggered on staggered blocks. So comparison's actually like taking you away from understanding what it is that you want from your life and your own particular path, and being able to find your joy and your gratitude and your appreciation. And that was a really difficult time for me. And I think the steer away from learning to compare myself, and I kind of was very firm with myself. And I actually, and it's also how I engage on social media. So I'm not very active on social media in terms of like actually finding other people or it being in the cancer community or the health community. Like where I have relationships, they've grown very organically. So in the same way, like you and I have connected, it's been a very organic process rather than like, kind of going out there, like connecting with everyone, because for me it's kind of not the energy that I put out there, because I feel like we're just all so unique. And I've come to realize, like, because of the way my disease is and the way it's progressing, there's no point me comparing, because the only person that can forge my path is me, and the only person that's going to live Danny's life is Danny. Like you're the only person, you're the architect. So comparison's completely, it's probably the most useless tool. And I know I'm going on, but the only other point I would make around this that I encounter is that people say comparison is a form of inspiration. And I really heavily dispute this, because the two are very different. So comparison is toxic. Inspiration is a completely different mechanism. And I would say if you're finding yourself comparing yourself, the best tool that I've learned and the best technique is to actually use that as an internal compass, to not pretend that you're being inspired, but to guide you into becoming a bit more self-aware around what is actually troubling you. Because comparison is usually some kind of feeling of lack in ourselves, and it's something that we're missing, which can lead to worse things like jealousy and envy and bitterness and anger. And so I would really encourage people that if you find yourself comparing yourself to someone, actually try and ask yourself, like, what is it that is bothering you about you? Like what is it, and why is it important to you? And I think that's kind of the most helpful thing that I did for myself personally, to get myself out of it.
Some people find or say that sometimes comparing themselves upwards can be quite motivating in a way.
Yeah, I
Is
hear
that
that.
something that you sort of agree with, or do you think that comparison as a whole is never helpful, specifically for you as an individual?
I personally think comparison is never helpful. So when you talk about comparison and an upward point of view, I see that as the people who inspire me. And I see that as the people who make me want to be better myself. And that's not comparison. That's people who are dealing with life circumstances and handling themselves and showing people that you can take unfair, unjust situations, or you can be normal. You don't have to be extreme, and sending out positive messages into the world, and who make me want to be a better version of myself. Like, for me, that's inspiration. There's no comparison. Like comparison to me personally is useless. Like, you and I could go into a gym tomorrow, and like, what's the point of me comparing myself to you? Because even if you're doing something, it doesn't make one of us better than the other. That's society dictating what we perceive value to be. Like, do you inspire me? Like, absolutely, 100%. Like, I love the messages that you put out, and the help that you're giving people, and really, like, the lives that you're helping change and show people such like a positive aspect of life and how you can live it. Like, for me, that makes me want to be better. But I don't compare myself to you. I just like want to be around that energy. So, I think that's more what it is. It's more really around, like, find the people that inspire you, and be around that energy, and also, it starts with you. Be the energy that you want to be around.
Yeah, I love that. And when you were stuck in sort of comparing yourself in quite a negative way, and you were struggling with that, were there any specific boundaries that you set with yourself, or actions that you took to help you snap out of that?
Yeah, I think so I actually do a lot of journaling, and the reason that I do that is because I am very, very passionate that we don't train our brains in the same way that we train our bodies. So we have something like 60,000 thoughts a day, but they're all rambling around in our heads, and we're not training ourselves. So we'll go and train our bodies, but we're not training one of the biggest muscles in our bodies, which is our brain. And it all starts with your brain. And if you don't rule your brain is going to rule you. And for me, like, journaling is a real way in which you develop self-awareness, coherence of thoughts, understanding patterns, behaviors, problems. So that for me is kind of really, like, really, really important. And then I think also understanding how you use, like, social media, because I think it's a real, I love it. Like, I'm not a cancel culture for social media. Like, I wouldn't know you if it weren't for social media. I wouldn't know Jodie if it weren't for social media. And I think that the connectivity and what it does is, like, really great. And I've met amazing people through it. But I do not scroll. I don't really search for anything. I look at who I look. And as I said, like, if something comes organically from it, for me, that's great. But that's a really, really big boundary that I have in place, because as much as I am a huge supporter of everyone in life, and I believe in elevation, and that we should all, be looking to improve each other's lives and help each other rather than drag each other down. It's just really about, like, understanding that what we pay attention to is where our energy goes. And so if you're paying attention to things that are bothering you, that are triggering you, you need to really ask yourself why you're doing that to yourself. So for me, that's a boundary. So, my social media is a really positive, great place. I don't spend an enormous amount of time on there. And I think that that's another really healthy boundary. And, I think you know, for me, real life is like the connectivity that you have with people outside of screens and texts. And I think that that's a really, really important like tool for comparing.
Yeah, I love that. Like I always talk to clients about using social media intentionally, because it can
Yes.
be a great tool, like you said, for connecting with people or for learning or inspiration if you use it correctly. But I think far too many people fall into the trap of just like dead scrolling and
Yes.
doing it in a way which is quite mind numbing as opposed to inspiring or like connecting with people.
Yeah. And I think this goes back to the energy that you want in your life as well. Like, you know, if you want to be making changes in your life, like what you're engaging with, what's the energy that you are absorbing? So yeah, 100%, I completely agree with you. You need to be intentional, and think about who you're following and what they're saying, because it's quite troublesome to me, actually, a lot of what people are saying on social media nowadays. And I think that it can be it's a very dangerous tool when used incorrectly. It's really polar opposite, like really positive, or can be really, really dangerous and
Yeah.
mess with your mental health.
And on the topic of social media as well, I think that a lot of people fall into the trap of using it for external validation and seeking that. Is that something that you've ever found yourself caught up in chasing?
Yeah, I mean, for me personally, no. Like, social media for me, like I use it for the good that it's brought into my life. And as I said, the authenticity and the relationships that I have. I've got like some amazing friends that I've met through there. And I really use it for me personally, just as a platform to like spread the messages that I want to spread. I also am really a big believer in, I I have this story, but I don't I don't weaponize my story. And I think that this is also why I'm not actively out there like connecting with everyone on a cancer journey or every single person who has a health related issue, because everyone expresses themselves emotionally completely differently, and that's entirely personal and completely up to them. You know, the way in which I try and share my story is not to weaponize it against anyone, not to be like, well, I have all of this stuff going on. I have kidney failure, no organs, and stoma bags, and I'm still going to the gym. That's not it at all. Like, I'm trying to use the platform and the story to really kind of integrate the message of what I think is really important, which is, you know, don't self-sabotage your own life and the gifts that you've been given because you cannot get out of your own way. You know, don't be a victim. Like, you have more control over your life. Unfair things are always going to happen to all of us. Death is real. It's none of us are getting out of here alive. You know, people are suffering all over. And I think it's just about understanding the power of being able to feel like you are more of an architect of your own life than you may believe. So for me, so like social media validation is completely meaningless. And it's just my hope that, you know, if one person, and it's probably why I connected with you, because I can tell like the way in which you speak and how you are on social media. You know, if one person takes something away from what you've said and develops a better relationship with themselves about their self-worth or their relationship with food and their love of themselves, so they don't miss out on their life, or you've done your job. Like, that's what it is. Like, I don't need clapping. I don't think that you need clapping. I think it's just genuinely about trying to help people just really understand that there's so much joy in life, and time's not infinite. Nothing's guaranteed. You've just got to live it now while you can.
Yeah, 100%. I'm fully on board with that. And that's absolutely the case. Like, for me, social media is about trying to put out a good message. And
Yeah.
you know, if people see my content and that helps improve their health or the quality of life or their perspective on life, then that's a win for me. And that's what I'm trying to do, just put out a good message. And I think when you do own your own business, it is very easy for people to get sucked into like placing way too much emphasis on things like likes, followers, etc. When in reality, they would be so much better off focusing on genuinely helping the people that they're trying to help, the reason that they got into doing what they're doing.
Yeah. And this is why I'll just say I have so much respect for you, and why I was happy to talk to you, because I get asked to talk a lot about my situation. And the reason that I do is because it's clickbait. Like, let's just get real. It's clickbait. And people want to use and manipulate that. And I think your expression and your authenticity, like that comes across like really, really clearly to me on your social media platform. And that is more important. And what worries me a lot more nowadays is like, especially you in your position in your industry, you know, clickbait is what gets attention. And, you know, people are on these kind of extremist views in terms of attracting clients, trying to generate business, make money. And it is very difficult for someone, and I have so much respect for you, because it's actually more difficult to do what you guys are trying to do, which is actually show people that there's an alternative, that there's a normal way, that there's a healthy way, because it's the extremist views that get the clickbait. And you're trying to do something and help people and be authentic, and that is so much harder and cuts against the grain of society. And you know, that's kind of the state that we're in, which is why I always say, like, use social media authentically. And there are certain people that I think like who have the microphone and shouldn't have the microphone, because all they do is moan. And then other people which don't, you know, necessarily have the microphone. But you know, that's like you're in a really hard business, because the message that you're putting out there is actually the truth and accurate. But you know, people love clickbait on social media.
And it's not like, let's face it, it's not the easiest message to sell. Like, it's much easier to sell an extreme transformation.
Yeah, 100%.
People
Before and after pictures. Yeah. I'll get you shredded. Like I said this to someone the other day. They were asking me about prepping for photos, and I was like, any joker can get you shredded. I was like, but can people give you a sustainable, happy life? Like, don't look for people that like can get you shredded. Look for someone who's going to give you a life.
Yeah.
Like,
the thing is, for me, like, although it would be so much easier for me to make money selling transformations, it's not important to me. I don't really care. Like, I genuinely want to impact people's lives, and I would rather make less money and do that than sell transformations and like know that I'm not living in line with my values and what I want to promote. So yeah.
But I also think this is where the distinction comes in, because in speaking to you and who you are very clear on who you are as a person and your values and where your line is. And if that's a message that I could send to anyone right now, I would say, like, that's where it starts. Like, you know, often people are looking to kind of fix problems in themselves externally, which is why there's a focus on social validation, social media, aesthetics, you know, making money, owning a handbag. These are the things that we're trying to look for to fix something in ourselves, because we don't understand our values. And when you understand your values as passionately as you do, and as much as I believe in my own values and what I'm saying, you can live authentically, because you don't need that validation, because you know you're doing it for yourself and you're authentic. And whether people choose to like you or not like you, it doesn't matter, because we're not going to be everyone's cup of tea anyway, so who cares? But it doesn't bother you, because you're authentic and you're living by your values. And I think that is just so refreshing.
Yeah, definitely. And like I said, I can see the same in yourself, and it's so good to see. And so when people do fall into the trap of seeking external validation through social media, why is it that can be problematic for people?
I think it's gotten even worse. I think there's the thing is about validation is that people have to understand. I'll get a little psychology from my old background here, but you know, validation is actually like genetically imprinted into us, because it's actually how we survived as a species, because the more societal validation you had, the more likely you were to survive, the more mates you would have, the more food you'd probably get. So we're still genetically programmed to seek validation, all of us, even you and I. But then what we're coupled with in 2022 is the fact that, you know, we have these big industries, marketers, we have people sitting in a room thinking up ways in which to make us feel less than. That's their job. Their whole job is literally, how can we make people feel so rubbish about their lives that if they don't buy our product or like are validated by owning this thing or doing this holiday or experience, you know, that's what we're facing. So I feel like this is and then there's the rise of kind of the influencers, and even kind of like the anti-influencers, because even that's like validation. And I feel like this just goes back to understanding like your values. And you know, the things that I would always talk to people about is like, understand yourself first and foremost, because then you understand kind of like where you need like the validation or where it's coming from. Because, you know, for a long time, like you know, I pretty much lost everything through the cancer experience and the illness. And, you know, I became infertile, you know, I was very ill. I was in a wheelchair. I lost most of my hair. My husband was brushing my teeth. I lost my career, which I'd worked my whole life for, the family that I thought I was going to have, which I could never have more of. And I didn't really know who I was. I had a loss of identity. And that was because I had never stopped to consider or think who I was as a person, because I was defined by these other things, these external things. And so I think that's why it's really, really crucial. It was a big wake up call to me. And you know, maybe I would never have had it. Maybe I'd still be like working in, you know, finance, asset management, like hurrying around and not having any values. But I feel like if we actually stop and think about what it is that we want in terms of our own characteristics and what we want from life, then you know, it becomes a lot easier, because validation is just going to stop you, and comparison is just going to stop you from living a happy life, and you're self-sabotaging.
Yeah, you're keeping yourself stuck, and it's also a never-ending thing. Like, you're never going to get to a point where you're like, oh, I've got enough external validation now, like I'm sound. It's a never-ending process. Like, you'll get a bit and you will feel good for that temporarily, and then you will want to seek more. So it's a never-ending cycle. It's not like, oh, once you get X amount of external validation, or once you get validation for a certain person, it stops there. It doesn't. It's never ending. And I think that's one of the biggest problems of it as well.
And I think it goes back to what we said earlier about understanding that situations evolve. So, you know, for example, I had a lot of comments this year just because like I did photos, and, you know, my abs are quite a like a defining feature. I just happen to have quite a defining feature from my abs. Now, if I was getting all this validation because, you know, I have these abs, which everyone, I don't know what it is about abs, but people want them. And you can see them clearly on the photos. But I'm about to have a stoma bag. So there's a very real example of, if I was really like intoxicated by that validation around my abs, I'd be in an absolute spiral nightmare now, because not only am I probably never, I don't think I've ever seen anyone with a, correct me if I'm wrong, people please send them my way, but you know, working out your abdominals once you've got part of your intestine sticking out, I mean, of the risk of prolapse and hernias, like that's obviously not the done thing. Plus you've got a bag on your stomach. Yeah. So, you know, I think that this is a really, really good example, like, of you saying, like, if you're just constantly chasing this hit of validation, and if that is what I, you know, put my worth against, yeah, I'd be in all sorts of trouble. And like, that's yeah, it's just, you know, those those photos, I'm never going to be the same again, but that's the whole point. And I'll do photos again, and I'll come as I am, because that's who I am, you know, and I'll just have a bag. Be
and
fine.
I very much agree with what you were saying, in that when people fall into the trap of seeking external validation, it does very often lead to them chasing goals that are not really goals that are meaningful to them. They're just goals
100%.
that, you know, they see other people striving towards, that get more interaction, but actually that don't make them happy, and they're literally just wasting their lives away. And behind the scenes, they might be miserable, even though it looks like they might be successful on things like social media or externally.
Yeah, I completely agree. Someone sent me a message once, and this really worried me. She had a bowel surgery, and she sent me a message, and it was a positive, nice message. But she said to me, "I've taken your profile to my nutritionist because I want to look like you." And I said to her, first of all, like, no one, like, we all look how we look. Like, it's irrelevant. Like, and you have no idea what your recovery is going to be like. Don't do that to yourself. Like, the fact that you're still here, that you've survived, and that you've had this surgery, like, that's enough for now. And, you know, you need to look at your own path and where you want to go. But like, exactly what you're saying, like, this person's adopting, you know, as a set of beliefs and goals which probably aren't particular to them, because it's just kind of a visual representation of what I look like, which is just half the story. So it's very dangerous. So you really do have to know what you want and why you want to do it. So
yeah, I agree with that. And you've spoken a little bit about your sort of use of social media, and on social media these days, there's a lot of talk about authenticity. What is your sort of personal view on towing the line between being authentic on social media and showing up as your true authentic self, but not oversharing?
So I'm probably going to be a bit unpopular here, but I've got a real issue with that at the moment, because I see so much moaning on social media, and it's really problematic. And I think that there's a rise in moaning around mental health and health related issues, and the reason for that is because it's obviously, you know, you don't come at the person who's saying that they're having a bad mental health day. And it's totally understandable, and these things are happening. But I think the problem is that people don't distinguish between problems and inconveniences. And that's how I describe life. So people will have inconveniences and they'll be calling them problems, and they'll be having breakdowns on social media. And obviously then, you know what this is? It's just another way to validate yourself. So it's a way in which, you know, I could go out there and tell you every single day on Instagram, and put a post up about pretty much all of the heartbreaking things that have happened to me, and you'd probably feel really, really, really sorry for me, and rightly so, because it's true, it's authentic. But I think this is the thing where you like toe the line, because it comes back to validation. Like, I try and blend it in a way of which, like, this isn't a laundry list of trauma. It's not a laundry list of here is all of the really awful things that I'm struggling with and dealing with, and I want you to feel sorry for me so I can feel a little bit better about my crappy life. It's instead like, take this and turn it into something positive, and you take away some type of perspective in how you can change your view on your life, because if I'm able to do it, then you can too.
Yeah.
So I have a really big issue, actually, like, because there's and it's hard, because you ask a lot of people and they'll say, well, I'm being authentic. I'm upset, I'm sad, I'm having a bad day, my back hurts, I'm crying. But I just don't think that it's helpful in society. And I think you've got to distinguish between what's a problem, what's an inconvenience, and how do you tackle it? What's your energy? And do you really genuinely, authentically want to help people and inspire people? Because if you do, then authenticity is about bringing a different energy, bringing in a different perspective. It's not about, here's my story, feel bad for me, but I'm still rallying. It's a delicate line, and I feel like I can probably talk about it a little bit more because I do genuinely have awful things happening to me, but I feel like it's terrible for like normal people. So like a lot of your clients, where they probably don't have health concerns, and then they're looking and seeing all of these people with trauma, and people are crying. And again, I'm not saying it's not authentic. I'm sure they do think it's authentic, but I really just believe in being a different type of energy and having a different type of perspective. And we're not the worst things that has ever happened to us. And I think you just got to take your pain, and you've got to take your suffering and your crap circumstances, and you've got to use it for good. And that for me is where the authenticity is. I'm not my disease. The disease is a part of who Petrina is and the life that I lead. It's not, I am not, my whole life is not the whole disease.
Yeah, I love that. And I think ultimately, I think the line is where the intention is from, where the intention is coming from. And some people might share some things with potentially the intention of seeking validation. And they might think that the people receiving that information might not know, but often it is very easy to see through, I think, where people are sharing something from, because you can share your journey with genuine intentions, not to seek external validation, but actually to just be like, look, these are my circumstances. This is what I'm doing regardless of them. Feeling certain emotions is a part of this process, and we're human, and that's okay. But not sharing it from the place of, right, I want loads of people to message me off the back of this, like asking if I'm okay, or like give me interaction off the back of this sort of thing.
Yeah, I have genuine concerns that we're moving to a place where people are creating more problems than they actually have for validation. And my concern around it is that I don't even think that people realize that they are trying to be validated, and that's the problem. Because you see this stuff and it's not genuine, but I don't think they realize it's not genuine. And it is about validation. It is about, and it's quite, what more can you validate with, of course, like mental health issues, sickness, illness. It's very validating. It can be very intoxicating to stay in victim mentality. It's very seductive. It can feel great when life is like going against you. Like, of course, when people rally around you, it can feel great, but like, again, when that support, it's not real. Like when that, like, and I think this about Instagram as well. Like, obviously, like I have my authentic friends and support network, and I have a lot of support on Instagram, but it's also, who's calling 999, who's there in the hospital, who's doing the rubbish jobs, like going and doing your laundry because you need more pajamas and you're stuck in the hospital. Like that's the real life you've got to build for yourself. Like you can't get stuck in this social validation, intoxicating victim mentality. You've got to build something real.
And I think when people are going through genuine struggles, one of the best things they can do is give themselves time to process that behind the scenes, rather than literally in that moment when they are really struggling, actually taking to social media straight away. So I think that's something to bear in mind as well. When you are seeing people sharing struggles, it's like, actually, a lot of people would be best taking some time for themselves to process what they're going through and to deal with it, and then be in a better position to share things from a place of authenticity if they want to.
And I hope, it sounds like I'm trying to get validation from you now, but like I hope, and I think that that's where I come from, because I really do like process the things that I'm going through, and I share the information in what I hope to be a helpful way, rather than a way of which it's like, here's my laundry list, it's really bad, so because it's easy to go down that route, but you know, I think that's you know, the time to process things and really be articulate and understand what you're trying to say is really, really crucial.
No, I think your message comes across really well, and it comes from a place of like, look, life's throwing shit at me, but this is, you know, I'm cracking on regardless, and you're capable of great things, so stop holding yourself back. I think it comes from that place. And I also think that a lot of the time as people go through life, it often takes a traumatic life event or something along those lines to give them a certain perspective on life and to snap them into living life to their true potential. And I think sometimes hearing people like yourself talk about your journey and what you've been through, or other people and other traumatic life events, I think sometimes it helps put things into perspective for people who maybe haven't had these traumatic life events without them having to go through it themselves. And I think that has its place.
Yeah, I agree. And also, and I say to everyone as well, like some people say things to me like, well, I don't want to tell you because it's nothing like what you've been through. And I stop people straight because, you know, we don't have to go through the same things for it to mean something. Like if you're in pain and you've had an experience, like it's meaningful, like it's meaningful to you. Like this is not about the suppression of any type of emotion. It's not about like not being human, and it's not top trumps. You know, my health situation is not top trumps over someone else's very real problem that they may be having in a relationship or something like that. You know, we all are allowed to feel these emotions. It's just what you decide to do with these emotions. That's what I'm talking to you about. Like, where do you go from there? Like, you know, I love the analogy, and I always say this, like, if you have a flat tire, you change the tire, you don't slash the other three.
Yeah.
And, you know, often what I see in life is like people aren't just slashing the other three tires, they're burning the whole car down.
Yeah.
Like, so it's really like what you choose to do with the unfair, the unjust, the pain, and, you know, how you choose to handle yourself, and also how you choose to treat other people and elevate each other. Because, you know, like dragging each other down is like not going to get us anywhere. Like I really, really believe, and I see that a lot in female culture, and it really upsets me, because the more that we are okay with ourselves, and we get away from the things that you and I have just discussed, like comparison and validation, and we know our worth, the more we're able to elevate each other, because there's room for all of us. Like no one's going to take up space. You know, there is infinite space. So we should all be looking to elevate each other and helping each other live the best lives for us, because the more happiness there is, the more it gets spread around, and the world's just going to be a better place.
Yeah, I love that so much. And with the challenges that you've been through, have there been any moments where you have felt like it's been unfair, or where you felt like a victim?
Yeah, of course. I mean, you know, I've actually never felt like a victim, even from a very young age. So, you know, I've always actually had, it's never been the cancer or the health situation. I've always had this type of mentality, because I've always just had this unwavering faith in really believing that you can build the best life for yourself against any type of circumstance. And I've never really seen obstacles. I've always seen possibility. And so I think that's been quite different. Have I felt that things are unfair? Yeah, 100%. Yeah, of course, you know. And I think especially now, you know, I was already and I'm already very, very sick, and the last couple of weeks, if you, and you know, because we're connected, but you know, my son is not here, and he flew over for 3 days to see me, and I spent 3 hours with him, and then he had to call 999, and I was you know, in hospital with kidney failure. And you know, you of course you question and you look at your life and you think, wow, like this is just, you know, some of it's wild. Like, you're never going to get an answer to the question of why some things feel unfair. It goes back to kind of how you deal with them. But yeah, of course, and you know, things are going to be very serious in next year. You know, I've had a round of surgical appointments, and because things are so problematic now, there's going to be a lot of hospital time. There's the stoma surgery, there's the worry about the kidneys, there's the removal of the ovaries. So it's going to be at least a 4 or 5 month process starting in January for me next year. So, you know, that's a lot to wrap your head around. And my son will still be in Dubai in school, and I will be in London, and you know, we'll figure things out. But yeah, of course, it's, you know, it's really hard. It's really hard.
Yeah.
And I wish, do I wish things were different? Yeah, I absolutely. I'm not going to lie and say, you know, it's fine. I wish that things were different, because I see, you know, the people that love me suffering, and my family suffering, and people want me to be better, and I'm never going to get better. And it's hard for everyone. So, you know, I think it's a natural human. You know, we wouldn't be human if we didn't sometimes think that things were unfair. But again, it's these are the cards that I have been dealt in my life. And, you know, there is no contract, you know, there is no sense of entitlement. And, you know, we believe that we're entitled, and we believe we're going to just grow up and get married and have kids and have good lives, and one day we'll die peacefully in our sleep at 80 years old. And there's no contract that says that that's how it's going to go. And there's nothing that says that I'm special. I'm not special. This happened to me. And, you know, it's very, very sad, and I wish it was different. But this is my life, and this is what I personally have to decide how I'm going to deal with it. So yeah, I do wish things were different, but you know, sadly they're not. But I also believe in myself. So you know, we will get through this next lot, and we'll just see how it goes.
Yeah. When you have these moments where you feel like life is being particularly unfair, how do you not let this hold you back? And are there any specific sort of tools or behaviors that you engage in on a regular basis that really benefit you and help you through that?
Yeah, so for me, I mean, first of all, I don't dwell on it, because the reality is, like, you got to learn what you can control and what you can't control. I cannot control most of the stuff that's happening to me. So what I can control is my mental well-being, and keeping myself physically as well as possible. So like I said, I journal. I really love walking. Like, I can't like do strenuous walks, but like just being outside, like I think it's really important to get light exposure. I'm really, really big on light exposure, and just keep on moving. Training, that's just like that's just a non-negotiable to me. Like my love for training, my passion for training, and focusing on all of the things that I've got and all of the love that I've got. Like, you know, life has been unfair, but like, who am I to stop looking at all of the wonderful things that I've got? I've got, you know, a husband who's going through more than he should be doing, but it's incredible. I've got an amazing son. So yeah, so I couldn't have more. I'm infertile, but I hit the jackpot with what I got. And, you know, I have, like, yes, I've got all of this disease, but I've got great medical care in terms of people who want me to live. I've got great friends. I've still got things I can do. So I try and focus not on the loss, because I feel like if you stay in that unfair place where you focus on your grief and your loss, like, it's going to be really hard for you. And I think that you just try and keep moving forward, and you take it day by day. And on the worst days, you just say, all I have to do is get through today, just this moment. Those are on the worst days. And then, you know, generally, like if you look for the light, you're going to find the light. That's just how my brain works. My brain's just like more geared to just seeing the positive and just seeing all of the good. So you know, but I would say to people who aren't really at that mental stage yet, like the biggest thing is, you know, honestly, like don't dwell, don't focus too much, and actually find the things that make you happy and focus on that more.
Yeah, I love that so much. And I like this podcast has just been incredible. To sort of wrap up, out of
Okay.
all of the lessons you've learned throughout your life so far, if you could like teach that to someone without them having to go through shit, what would it be?
Yeah. First of all, you don't have to go through shit. Like, this is the biggest misconception ever. You don't have to have gone through anything that I've gone through. And it wasn't my health situation that made me this way. I've always been this way. I just used the health situation because it's a strong analogy. But I really, really believe that people can live just the most incredible lives, like under the most extraordinary circumstances. And I really believe in being the energy that you want to see in the world and that you want to be around. Like, if you are looking to improve yourself in any way, like, you start by improving yourself and then seeking out and finding the people to be around. And I just think that you have so much potential in you. Like, don't wait to be, you said this is your quote, not me, but like, don't wait to be perfect to start. Like there's no such thing as perfect. You've got the potential in you, and you've only got one life. Like, this isn't a dress rehearsal. And I don't think that anyone is going to want to sit there when they're 70, no health crisis, and look back and regret the things that they didn't do. Because I can tell you now, hand on my heart, if something went wrong and I don't make it through and like that's it for me, I have no regrets. I have none. And I genuinely mean that, because I've made sure that that's how I've lived. Do I want more time? Yes, 100%. I want more time because I love to live. But do I have regrets? No.
Yeah, I love that so much. And like I said, I'm so grateful for your time today, because I think this podcast has been so powerful. And I know that you don't sort of place too much emphasis on social media, but if anyone does want to follow along with your journey or connect with you, where can they find you?
So it's just my name, Petrina Barber. So Petrina Barber on Instagram. So yeah, so I'm just on there, and that's kind of where I post my my mix, my very confusing mix of either some like 6-pack abs or like hospital stay. I think I confuse everyone, but that's where I am, and that's where the updates are.
Yeah, amazing. Anyone listening, if you want to connect with Petrina, I will put her details in the description down below. Thank you so much for listening. It means the world. If you do enjoy the content on the Female Fitness Podcast, if you could like, subscribe, and leave a review down below, it would mean the world. And I will see you next week.